All right, we welcome you back to these studies that we're continuing to do on the question of, is my church the one in the Bible? This is number 9 of those studies, so this is the last of those. We've been pursuing the question, is my church the one that's in the Bible? We've talked about the one church. We've talked about worship. We've talked about, do I have to attend worship? We've talked about the matter of benevolence. We want to continue that study. And so let's get underway looking at the same question. Is my church the one that's in the Bible? Again, this is lesson 9 of 9. And let's focus on the organization of the church and the work and the role of elders. Let's talk about the organization of the church. Let's start with this. Let's start with the organization itself. What does the Bible reveal about the organization of the local church? Well, let's talk about the term church as it's used in the New Testament. It's used in at least two senses. It's used in a universal sense, referring to all of the saved all over the world, no matter where they may be. That's how that passage in Matthew 16 and verse 18 uses the term church, where Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church. Ephesians 4 and in verse 4, there is one body. That's how the term body is being used with reference to the universal church. The church in this sense has no organization. It has no work and it has no treasury. So it has no way of functioning. There is no organization of the church in that sense. But the Bible uses the term church in a local sense. And the church in this sense is used, or the term church is used in the local sense in 1 Corinthians 1 and in verse 2, where we read of the church of God which is at Corinth. In Romans 16:16, the churches of Christ salute you. Those were various local congregations. The church in this sense, the local sense, has elders and deacons. Paul wrote to the church at Philippi with bishops and deacons. We'll see in a moment the term bishop and elders mean the same thing. That is, it refers to the same people. Acts 14:23, they appointed elders in every church. So the term church in the local sense does have organization, having elders and deacons. Now let's draw a distinction between the universal and the local church. In the universal sense, the church, there is only one. Ephesians 4:4 says there is one body. But there are many local churches, like the churches of Christ in Romans 16 and in verse 16. The universal church has no organization, where the local church has elders, Philippians 1:1. The universal church has no work as a whole, where the local church has work to do, edifying itself in love. The universal church has no treasury. There's no Bible passage. The local church does have a treasury. We're to lay by and store upon the first day of the week. The word store is the word from which we get our word or concept of treasury. Now let's talk about how every church had its own elders. Acts 14:23. There was a plurality of elders. You never have a reference in the New Testament of a church having an elder without having a plurality of elders. Titus was to appoint elders in every city. There were elders in every church, Acts 14:23. 1 Peter 5 verses 1 and 2 shows that the elders have the oversight among the flock of God among them. And so this is the organization we read about in the pages of the New Testament. Let's talk about the terms that refer to elders. There's more than one term referring to those who are elders or shepherds of the flock. First of all, there's three terms in the original that's translated with two English words each, making 6 English terms. The word presbyterion, this word simply means eldership or elderhood, one who is older, literally a bearded one. The term presbyterion suggests maturity in judgment, maturity in experience, and people of wisdom. How is that term translated? The term elder is from Presbyterion, Acts 14:23. They appointed elders in every church. We're not to rebuke an elder, like in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 17. But the same term is translated presbyter, by the laying on of the hands of the presbytery, 1 Timothy 4 and in verse 14. So the presbyter and an elder, or the eldership and the presbytery, are all referring to the same group of people. They come from this word presbyteron. But here's another term that is used to refer to those who are elders, episkopos. What does that word mean? An overseer, a superintendent. There says one who is charged with the duty of seeing that things are done by others. It's a compound word, epi meaning over, and the rest meaning to look at, so to look over or to oversee. That word is translated overseer in Acts 20 and verse 28. The elders were appointed as overseers of the local church. Well, that same term is translated bishop in 1 Timothy 3 and in verse 1. So an elder is an overseer, a presbyter, an elder, and a bishop. Those are all synonymous people, same people. But there's another term, poimen, and what does that word mean? That word means one who keeps or guards the sheep, to tend the flock, the work of a shepherd, to feed, guard, and guide and protect. How is that word translated? Shepherd or feed. Elders are to shepherd or feed the flock of God which is among them. Acts 20 and verse 28. Furthermore, the term pastor is used. It's referring to those who are shepherds or those who feed the flock. Ephesians 4 and verse 11, the term pastor is used. There were pastors in the church. That doesn't refer to one who is a preacher or one who by himself, the sole leader of a local church, but it's referring to the same people that we might call elders or bishops or shepherds or overseers. Now let's take those three terms. Those same three terms is translated elder or presbyter. We're going to see how they're used. The term elder or presbyter gives the idea of maturity. The term overseer or bishop suggests something of their administrative role, the kind of work that they do, they oversee. And the term shepherd or pastor suggests something of the teaching role, of instructing. So we have elder or presbyter, overseer or bishop, shepherd or pastor, referring to those that we may think of as being elders in the church. Now in Acts chapter 20, those three terms, all three terms, are used to refer to the same people. Now let's notice this in Acts chapter 20. In verse 17, Paul calls these men who were leaders of the church at Ephesus, he calls them elders. He called for the elders of the church at Ephesus to come and meet him at Miletus. Verse 28, he told them they were overseers, and they were told to feed the flock of God. Now those are the three terms. That is, the term for elders, the term for overseers, and the term for shepherd, all are found right here in Acts 20, referring to the very same people. We see the same thing happening in 1 Peter chapter 5. Peter refers to himself as an elder and talks about elders in the church at verse 1, calls them overseers at verse 2, and they are charged to feed or to shepherd the flock of God, verse 3. Those same three terms translated and with 6 English terms refer to the very same people. Now I know something about the organization of the local church, and I know something about the terms that refer to elders. Let's talk about the work of elders. What is their work? Elders are to lead. It's suggested in the term elder. The one who is older is to lead. There were elders among the Jews. We read about in Matthew 15, Matthew 21, Exodus 3, chapter 4 as well. They were leaders. Due to their age and maturity, they should have developed genuine leadership abilities. They're responsible for decision making. That would involve setting goals, having aims, and planning, guiding the church in its direction. They must have wisdom to see things of where their decisions lead, where their actions lead. That's the principle of James 1 and in verse 5, being able to see down the line where things happen, where things go. The leadership involves making tough decisions, and they need to be able to defend those decisions and give a reasonable explanation of their decisions. The work of the elders involve overseeing, 1 Peter 5 and verse 2, as stewards of the fold of God, Titus 1 and in verse 7. This suggests they have authority to lead. It's more the idea of responsibility, the weighty responsibility, than some kind of authority they have. Didn't say they don't have authority, but it's a weighty responsibility. Thirdly, the work of elders involves being an example to the flock, 1 Peter 5, and in verse 3, he must be faithful himself. He and his family both need to be examples to follow. They should feed the flock of God, Acts 20 and verse 28, 1 Peter 5, verses 1 and 2. They should be involved in teaching. They need to be able to teach, 1 Timothy 3, and see that teaching is done. They need to be watchful about what is taught. That is, elders need to be very careful of the kind of teaching done in the Bible class and in the pulpit. They are responsible. They need to make sure the whole counsel of God is taught in the pulpit where they are elders, Acts 20 and verse 27. They bear the responsibility for the pulpit and classroom teaching. Though the man in the pulpit may not teach the truth, it is the elders who have the responsibility to make sure the truth is being taught. The elders' work involves the responsibility of defending the flock against error. In the book of Titus, chapter 1, and in verse 11, by the way, Titus 1 is talking about the work of elders and the qualifications of elders. Verse 11 says, whose mouths must be stopped who subvert whole houses, teaching things they ought not for the sake of dishonest gain. This is in the context of speaking of elders and what elders are to do beginning at verse 5. So they prepare to deal with error themselves. Not just that they have someone who can, they need to prepare themselves to be ready to deal with error. They should have the welfare of the church in their interest, that they're making sure that truth is taught and defending it against error. Their responsibility is that of watching for souls. Hebrews chapter 13 and in verse 17. What a weighty responsibility of taking care of someone's soul. They need to watch for straying, for those who are weak, and dangers that people may be facing. They need to take heed to the flock. Acts 20 and verse 28, that's watching for souls. Now we've looked at the qualifications, or we've looked at the organization of the church, the terms that are used with reference to elders, the work of elders. Let's focus on the authority of elders. Here's some passages that teach that elders have authority. That is, they are overseers, Acts 20 and verse 28. 1 Peter 5, verses 1 and 2, again, they are overseers. They have that responsibility. Hebrews 13, verse 7, verse 17 says, elders rule over you. We are to obey and be submissive. Hebrews chapter 13. 1 Timothy 3, verses 4 and 5, they take care of the church. All of those passages suggest that elders have authority. Now, what is the nature of their authority? The authority is in the eldership, not in one man. It's not that one elder has authority, but as an eldership, that is, as a group, they have authority. Their authority is within the law of God. They cannot make any laws. We have one lawgiver, James chapter 1, 25 and 4 and verse 12. The authority of elders is within the law of God, that is, human judgment within the law of God. They are to guide people in the obedience of the law, Titus chapter 1, 1 Peter chapter 5. The book of Titus is about being sound in the faith. That's the theme. As mentioned in Titus 1 and in verse 9, he mentions sound doctrine. Titus 1 and verse 13, we read about being sound in the faith. Sound doctrine, chapter 2 and verse 1. Sound in the faith, verse 2 of chapter 2. Sound speech, verse 8. Titus is focusing on the theme of being sound in the faith. But Titus 1, 5 to 9 is saying that elders are there to guard and protect that sound faith. How do I know? Well, he deals with the qualifications of elders, talks about them dealing with error in the context of a book that talks about being sound in the faith. So elders are placed in a church to guard and protect sound faith. 1 Peter, the book of 1 Peter is about being holy in all of our conduct. Chapter 1 and verse 15. Chapter 5 shows elders are to guide in that holy living. So elders are in place to watch for souls, to guard and protect our sound faith, and to guide us in holy and godly living. Now let's talk about the scope of their authority. What do we mean? The local church autonomy suggests, that is self-governing, the limitation of elders' authority. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 4, we read, "The elders who are among you I exhort, I who am also a fellow elder and a witness of the suffering of Christ, and partakers of the glory that will be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by constraint but willingly, not for dishonest gain but eagerly, not as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away." Now from that passage we learn that elders are limited in their authority, and the limitation is to the local church of which they are members. Notice the wording, shepherd the flock of God which is among you. Now let's notice another text on elders' authority. And this time is Acts chapter 20 and verse 28, as Paul is talking to the elders of the church at Ephesus. "Therefore take heed to yourselves and to all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the flock, shepherd the church of God, which he has purchased with his own blood." Again, we see the limitation of their authority to the local church of which they are members. These elders of this local church have no authority over any other local church. And so their scope of their authority is limited to that local congregation. So what have we seen in our study as we bring this series to a close? We've seen the organization of the church, the terms that are used to refer to those who are elders, the work of elders, and the authority, the scope of the authority of elders. Again, we raise the question, is my church the one that was in the Bible? Does your church have elders? Do they have bishops? Do they have a plurality of elders, plurality of bishops? Or is it that deacons are the real leaders, or the pastor is the preacher who is really in charge? That's not what we read about in the pages of the New Testament.